Ever wonder why we can't just fix the world's biggest problems? Well, today, we're going to crack open the hidden code of clashing ideas that holds everything back.
I mean, you look at the headlines, right? Human rights, climate change, global inequality. It's a question we all ask ourselves. We see these huge, stubborn crises, and it feels so frustrating. We have the technology, we have the resources. So, what is the deal? What's the holdup?
And here's the thing, it's because these aren't just technical problems or political squabbles. Underneath every single one of these issues is a deep, fundamental disagreement about what's right, what's fair, and what we actually owe to each other as human beings. So let's start with a big one, the human rights puzzle. We throw the term universal human rights around all the time. But what does it really mean? And, does everyone even agree on it?
Okay, so a lot of Western thought on this really kicks off with guys like John Locke and this incredible idea of natural rights. The concept is actually pretty simple, but it's so powerful. You are born with certain rights, life, liberty. They're yours. A government doesn't give them to you, which means no government can justifiably take them away. They are inherent. Now, this is where it gets super interesting. Even the philosophers who agree that we should have rights totally disagree on why. In one corner, you've got Immanuel Kant. His view is that rights are about a moral duty. We respect people's rights because people have dignity. Simple as that. You don't use people as a means to an end. But in the other corner, you have John Stuart Mill and utilitarianism. He says, look, rights are great because they lead to the best results, the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So is a right an unbreakable moral rule, or is it a practical tool for building a better society? That one question changes absolutely everything. Okay, so that's the beautiful, clean theory. But when these ideas smack into the real world, oh man, it gets messy. That philosophical ideal crashes hard into a very complex reality. For starters, you have cultural relativism, which asks a really tough question. Is it fair to impose one culture's idea of rights onto another? Then you've got the debate over what even counts as a right. Is having healthcare as fundamental as having free speech? And finally, let's be real. Even when we all agree on a right, who's going to enforce it? International law can often feel, well, a little toothless. So this is where political philosophy hands us a couple of tools to think this through. One tool is cosmopolitanism. It says, hey, we're all citizens of one world. Our main job is to protect rights everywhere, no matter what border they're behind. But then communitarianism pushes back and says, hold on, rights only make sense inside the values and traditions of a specific community. And believe me, this isn't just an academic squabble. This is the heart of the debate every time we talk about international intervention. And that whole idea of what we owe to people across borders, well, it leads us right into our next big dilemma: global justice. In a world where we have so much wealth, but also so much extreme poverty, what do the rich actually owe the poor? And again, you see two totally different starting blocks. On one side, global egalitarians say that where you're born is just a lottery. It's morally random. So why should it decide whether you have access to basic resources? They believe everyone deserves a fair slice of the pie. But then libertarians fire back, saying, nope, individual property rights are sacred. To them, forcing someone to give up their wealth, even to help someone else, is basically a form of theft. So you see the clash, right? Is a billionaire's fortune a global resource, or is it their property, full stop?
But maybe we're asking the wrong question. What if it's not about money or stuff at all? There's this other idea called the capabilities approach, and it reframes the whole goal. It argues that real justice isn't about giving people things. It's about making sure everyone has the genuine opportunity, the real capability, to live a life that they themselves value. It's about freedom, not just finances. But here's the thing. No matter which philosophy you pick, you slam right into this one brutal fact. The gap between the world's richest and poorest people isn't just a gap, it's a chasm, and it's not getting any smaller. And this isn't some accident of fate, right? This skewed playing field is held in place by real concrete things. We're talking about extreme poverty that traps millions of people. We're talking about climate change that hammers the very countries who did the least to cause it. And we're talking about international trade policies that, let's be honest, often seem rigged to help the rich get richer. And this is why I love this slide. It shows how these big philosophical ideas actually turn into real-world policies.
If you're coming from an egalitarian point of view, you might argue for a global tax on wealth or carbon. If you're inspired by the capabilities approach, you might champion things like fair trade or debt relief, policies that give poorer countries the breathing room to invest in their own people's health and education.
Okay, so this brings us to the final massive question. To solve any of these huge problems, we need to work together. But in a world with almost 200 countries, who's actually in charge? Who gets to call the shots?
For like centuries, the answer has been pretty simple: state sovereignty. It's the bedrock idea of how the world works. A nation is the boss within its own borders. What happens inside is their business, period.
But, and this is the huge but of our time, our biggest problems couldn't care less about our borders. Climate change, pandemics, cyber attacks, they just laugh at lines on a map. So the need for global cooperation has never been more obvious, but it runs headfirst into every country's very powerful desire to stay in control.
And this clash, it's being thrown into overdrive by a bunch of modern forces. You've got the rise of nationalism and populism, which often paints working with other countries as a bad thing. You've got the big powers, like the US and China, competing in ways that can just freeze up international groups. And then you have all these new digital threats that move way faster than our old systems can handle.
So what's the way out? Well, again, the philosophy toolkit has a few options on the table. One path is to make global institutions like the UN more democratic, give developing countries a real say. Another is to just double down on multilateralism, commit to working together through these institutions, even when it's tough. And then there's a third really bold idea: global constitutionalism. The idea that some universal principles of justice are so important they should actually limit the power of any single country, like a constitution for the whole world.
So here we are, after wading through human rights, justice, and how the world is run, we're right back where we started, with a choice of which philosophical lens we're going to use to look at these problems.
And this is the most important thing to get from all of this. None of this is settled. Cosmopolitan versus communitarian, egalitarian versus libertarian, national sovereignty versus global cooperation. These aren't dusty arguments from old books. They are the live, loud, and incredibly urgent arguments happening right now, shaping our future as we speak.
So as we wrap this up, the big question isn't really for the philosophers anymore. It's for you. It's for us. As we stare down these huge challenges, which set of ideas, which philosophical code do we think offers the best path forward? The choice of which lens to use is ultimately ours.